Sekeres and Price for Monday, August 19th, 2024. We're coming to you from the Nation Network studio, built by Arbor Lee here at the iconic Wall Center, celebrating 30 years. And if you're looking for your next meeting space, company party, call the Wall, 604-331-1000. Matt Sekeres alongside Patrick Johnson of the Province and Post Media, sitting in for Blake Price today. Mike Rogerson hitting switches and conducting things. We got a big show coming up for you. And we will start with our poll question because there has been Canucks trade activity. Will Vasily Podkolzin come back to haunt the Vancouver Canucks? Yes or no? You can vote at the Sekeres and Price X and YouTube channels. Good morning.
Hi.
You got to turn your mic on.
My
First
mic is
mistake.
on. Oh,
okay.
okay.
All right. You can tell
Enjoy
he's a
my
print
Wall Center
guy.
coffee.
All right. Mic not on. Errors and omissions filling up already, Johnson. Thanks for doing this.
Oh,
how are you? How's your summer going?
My summer is going great.
Mm-hmm.
It's been excellent. Now it's going to slow down and kind of catch my breath.
You think so? It hasn't been slow to this point? Because, gosh, for me, I cannot remember an NHL offseason with so little activity. No, for look, August, understandable.
Yeah.
But July was really slow
was tough.
After the first foray of free agency.
Well, the key here, Matt, was I took most of July off.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have to experience that.
Well done.
I got to go camping.
Veteran move.
Got to go Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know. Yeah.
Got to a Blue Jays game
Got
at
to a
the
Blue
newly
Jays
renovated ballpark.
Yeah. Yeah.
Answer me the poll question. Podkolzin, does he come back to haunt the Canucks
No.
in any way, shape, or form?
No. Hard
Okay?
no. I mean,
Hard
listen, I think he's an NHLer. But at the end of the day, he's not going to shoot the lights out. And, you know, we're talking about like coming back to bite the Canucks. Is that like Cam Neely? Is that what we mean?
No, I think it can fall well short of Cam Neely.
But even so, I think here's a player I think he's a competent NHLer. I just don't think there's going to be a guy you're saying, oh, I think he could have helped the Canucks, but I don't think he was going to change the story here.
Well, it is our top story, brought to you by Yellow Dog Brewing, Neighborhood Brewing, Yellow Dog Spirits, and Foolish Winery. Podkolzin traded to the Edmonton Oilers for a 2025 fourth-round draft pick. It is actually a pick that belongs to the Ottawa Senators, which is an important distinction because you would suspect that the Oilers pick is late in the fourth round and the Senators pick is earlier in the fourth round. Of course, Edmonton was under the gun here with the St. Louis Blues having offer sheeted, and we don't see a lot of offer sheets in the National Hockey League. Both defenseman Philip Broberg, a one-time first-round pick, and forward Dylan Holloway, a one-time first-round pick. Edmonton swinging a second trade yesterday with Cody Ceci, getting his salary off the books with San Jose, moving a pick to do so, getting a minor leaguer in return. And so, Patrick, the question here is, did the Vancouver Canucks aid and abet the Edmonton Oilers in what was really a jail-like scenario where they were staring down the barrel of not having enough cap space and or not having enough depth in the forward ranks should they lose either of these players?
Well, I called it a pickle last week. The Canucks helped them out of a pickle. I thought it might happen a different way. I thought it might involve someone like Brett Kulak. But
they were pushing Kulak hard as well.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, it certainly is lining up as we sit here in the middle of the day on Monday that
they should be able to match.
They should be able to match and potentially match both. I mean, there's a lot of complicated scenarios, but they I think clearly are at least going to match on Broberg. I mean, that seems obvious at this point.
This from our friend Hart Levine at Puckpedia. The Oilers can match both offer sheets and be cap compliant to start the year by putting Evander Kane, Vancouver's Evander Kane, and his $5.125 million salary on LTIR, and then taking one player with an $800,000 or more cap hit and burying them in the minors, whether that's Connor Brown, whether that's Emberson, the young defenseman they got from San Jose.
Troy Stetcher.
Derek Ryan. So it does look like Edmonton is going to be able to match. In fact, by the time you listeners see this, perhaps they have already matched and keep both Broberg and Holloway. That's our top story, brought to you by Yellow Dog Neighborhood and Foolish Winery. And I was fortunate enough to be hanging out with the Yellow Dog guys this past weekend in Penticton. They have the new dog park patio set up there at the Penticton location. Newly renovated. The sign has gone on the door. And yesterday marked the 10th anniversary of Yellow Dog, and I was happy to be able to swing by the Port Moody tasting room for the festivities. It was absolutely jam-packed. Congratulations to Mike and Melinda Coghill, as well as John Main and Brad McDonald and Dan Cahill and Sydney Nikulka and everybody who makes Yellow Dog the fantastic small business and brand it is. We are lucky to be associated with you guys. Okay, they signed 4 wingers in free agency, Patrick, and that clearly made Podkolzin expendable. We had mused after the signing of Daniel Sprong, where did Vasily fit? If he didn't fit amongst the 12 forwards that they would dress on opening night, was there any risk of press box stagnation? Was there any risk of losing him on waivers?
I mean, I wrote a thing about this based on that very conversation. I sat there and thought, this is a smart idea. Way to go, Matt. Listen, I did think they would keep him on the roster simply because you always want more than you have. You don't want to just dress and line up the bare minimum. I thought there was an opportunity here to have multiple options. I mean, they talk about the idea of having competition in training camp and that kind of thing, but more than anything, you just want to be prepared for the reality that some guys are going to get hurt, and you want to have a ready-made substitute in there. I guess now I do find myself thinking way back to something Jim Rutherford said. I think it was in July after everything kind of settled down. He said, well, maybe Jonathan Lekaremaki could play a role this year. I mean, that's certainly possible, and removing Podkolzin from the equation does open a slight door for that. But I think more than anything, this is about this kid wasn't going to play. We aren't really going to see where he'll end up, and they need, they've made themselves a tiny bit of cap space here. They can keep him on. They can keep Giuseppe. They don't have to think about waiving those guys. I mean, obviously those guys don't light the meter up especially well, but they are there.
And it was clear that Talk had preferred Di Giuseppe based on how the playoffs went down. Of course, Oman can play center ice and has killed penalties. Our buddy Rob Williams at the Daily Hive tweeted that looks pretty ridiculous that they had him playing in the NHL at age 20 now. Now, he did score 14 goals that year and came on in sort of the final quarter of the season. Right. But was this a case of rushing a prospect, Patrick, because he had that top 10 pedigree?
He had the top 10. He played, 2 seasons in the KHL. Not a lot in the KHL, but you look at a player who, I think in the end you would have liked to have had him develop on a bit of a steadier curve. Let's not forget, he signs that contract and there was an AHL reassignment clause in it that in theory he could have asked to go back to Russia. And would he have? I'm not sure, but in hindsight, was he even really ready for the NHL at that point? And obviously that team was a mess almost right off the bat. So it was an odd scenario all around, I think, Matt. I would have in hindsight gone back and said, well, do we need to rush him? Was there a compelling case to have him in the NHL as a rookie? And there wasn't. Like he wasn't a nightmare. He wasn't over his head, but he didn't do anything that said this guy needs to be here. He would have been better off playing big minutes because, as I've said, now it's been 5 years since he was the man. He was drafted. He was the man in his draft year on his team. He spent 2 years sitting at the end of the bench in St. Petersburg. Where else would have been good for him to go? Like send him to Utica, let him be the man, and have a good strong season there. And then, or was it? I guess it was Abbotsford. It's first year in Abbotsford. Send him to Abbotsford. He's going to be in the Lower Mainland. He'll be in Vancouver. He just isn't going to be in the NHL quite yet. You give him a chance to adapt to what they want. But as we will recall, in the Jim Benning era, there was never a straight line for anything.
No. JFresh Hockey, Vasily Podkolzin acquired by Edmonton, a bottom 6 defense first winger who somehow managed to have terrible finishing on the 23-24 Canucks because, of course, everybody finished on the 23-24 Canucks, particularly early in the season. And then our friend Cam Robinson from Elite Prospects, who, of course, concerns himself with draft prospects. Podkolzin wrote a massive Hlinka performance to begin his draft year all the way to a top 10 pick, even if the rest of his showings did not indicate much. Now, I will mea culpa here because I love the pick when they
Mhm.
made it at 10th overall. I thought it was great value. I thought they had a chance to get one of the better players in that draft. I tend to lean, if you're going to make a mistake with a guy who's got size and athletic tools and the ability to finish. And I think Vasily checked all of those boxes. But what I was most comforted in my evaluation, that I thought it was a very worthwhile pick at number 10, was that I thought this guy had a floor. I thought, some of the guys in that draft, some of the guys in every draft, if they don't make it as a scorer in the National Hockey League, do they have a future? I thought Podkolzin was the rare guy that, okay, he may not have top 10 or top 6 skill to play in the National Hockey League, but could fit as a middle 6 winger, a bottom 6 winger, because there was enough there to be an NHL contributor. And that still might be the case, Patrick.
Yeah, sure.
But I think what I guess I'm most confused about with all of this, or at least most disappointed in, is player with size, player with decent wheels, player who knows his lot in life is forechecking. That seemed like a Tocchet profile of player.
Yeah.
And Tocchet had done such great work with so many Vancouver Canucks and the staff, of course, in building up so many Vancouver Canucks over the last year and a half. It's a little bit mystifying to me that Podkolzin was not one of the guys who made progress on his watch.
First of all, a little counter to our friend Cam Robinson, his pal JD Burke, his boss, if I'm not mistaken.
Did he mea culpa too?
Well, no, he's running counter. He said, "I'm not sure that the Vasily Podkolzin draft year narrative holds up under even the slightest bit of scrutiny." He said he was excellent at Hlinka, sure. Then he was really good at the World Junior, the Summer Showcase. He was solid World Junior Championship as an 18-year-old, and he produced in the VHL. So I don't know. He's like, obvious caveat is that two scouts can watch the same tape and reach wildly different conclusions about a player. It happens all the time. I thought he looked great in most of my viewings. So, I remember talking to guys like JD and talking to Jeremy. Remember, this was the year Jeremy Davis and Ryan Beach were doing their deep dives and very extensive profiles on prospects, looking at data and all stuff. And they were very high on him in terms of the way he progressed. All the reasons you just mentioned, the physical tools, the production was there, that this was a player that it wasn't necessarily going to be a top first line, blow it all out, star winger, but they were like, this guy's going to be a solid quality NHLer. And the two-way element has been there. Like he's been, as Jay Fresh said, bottom 6 defense first winger. Like that's pretty decent. That's not obviously a star, and you would like to find a star in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, like you said, this should be a player that should have worked. You would think this would work for Rick Tocchet. Rick Tocchet wants, basically competency first and then build from there.
Right.
And I go back to what an old family friend of mine used to say. Anytime I ever kind of got away, he would say, you need some decoking. You need to grind out the stuff out of your system, like an old steamship, and just kind of reset yourself. And I always felt like maybe that's what happened to Podkolzin here. He had
Is that a nautical term?
It's a nautical term.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Not
one I'm familiar with.
Take the coke out of the boiler.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, the stuff that builds up, you got to kind of clear the system.
I drew more contraband conclusions on
Not that. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I know. It's an old time. It's an old time.
Old timey.
Old time. But the Podkolzin, as I've said so many times, had so many ideas thrown in his head, especially in fact he had 3 coaches in his first 2 years in Vancouver. So many concepts, and it going from a system or a situation in Russia where it was don't screw up, kid, don't screw up or else.
Yeah.
And I just think he just totally lost his way. And I know that Rick Tocchet was really trying to find a way to kind of get him back to that instinctual player. And he seemed to, I guess they just never got there.
So the 2 years in St. Petersburg at the end of the bench, should this give them pause in going Russian early in the draft? From here forward?
I would say so. I think that there was a reason why this was a guy that might have gone higher in the draft. And there's a reason why he fell to the Canucks, that he was around for the Canucks at 10. And the Canucks did, they weren't worried about it at the time. Fair enough. Maybe you could have worked your way. He certainly, as we've already said, shouldn't have been in the NHL right off the bat. I think they should have been more incremental in the path, but that was not a Jim Benning specialty.
No, and speaking of Jim Benning, wow. This will be a tough question in his next job interview, but Jake Virtanen 6th overall in 2014, Olli Juolevi 5th overall in 2016, and Vasily Podkolzin 10th overall in 2019. Can you imagine what this Canucks organization would look like if they had actually hit on these picks? Patrick?
Well, he could, I suppose, turn around and say Brock Besser, Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, but you can't afford to miss on your first. And the Virtanen one, we all knew it. I mean, everyone at the time was screaming one of the other guys. There were arguments for having Virtanen in the first round. Now, let's recall, most people had him top in the first round, certainly, possibly even top 10. But the player that he was profiling as, there were question marks. Juolevi should have been an NHLer, but also was a stretch. He wasn't that far, but he certainly wasn't a guy you had to pick 5th. Matthew Tkachuk, obviously, being the name that was hanging out there.
Like Willie Nylander, Matthew Tkachuk, Matthew Boldy, three guys who went in relative short order.
Yeah, I mean, that's a different universe, isn't it?
You
pick those 3 guys. It's a totally different universe.
For sure. Podkolzin, his NHL, or his Vancouver Canucks career, ends with 139 games, including playoffs, 18 goals, 17 assists for 35 points. The problem is 14 of those 18 goals came in that rookie season of 21-22. So it's 9 points in the final 60 games. And look, I'd gotten some heat from listeners about being so down on Podkolzin, but it's just, there was zero bottom line, even in the American Hockey League. And yes, I know he missed some time with the concussion, but he was 238th in AHL scoring. His AHL career finishes with the Canucks at 49 points in 79 games. So there just were such meager returns that you needed to be an outstanding defensive forward to offset that. I mean, you needed to be someone like Bob Gainey, Yuri Lettinen, like somebody of that quality defensively.
Be the lead penalty killer. Become the lead penalty killer.
Never killed a penalty. Yeah. As I said, though, should have been a Tocchet player. Big body, move, forecheck. So if the Canucks are giving up on him, in Tocchet we trust on this one. And I bring that up, Patrick, because all summer long, we have heard from listeners and from Canucks fans saying it is still worth being patient with Vasily Podkolzin. And reasons were listed. The time in Russia where he didn't get a lot of reps, rushing him to the National Hockey League, the concussion that he suffered, power forwards take longer, right? There were a litany of reasons that Canucks fans had for him with regards to his progression and why it hasn't been swifter to date, and reasons why still many of them were willing to be patient. So I answered yes on the poll question. Now, I answered yes in part because you took the Edmonton Oilers out of jail here. It is clear that the Edmonton Oilers were looking to add a depth forward, assuming they may lose Dylan Holloway on this offer sheet to St. Louis. I hate the fact that this is with the division rival and your chief rival and maybe the team that you have to go through to advance beyond the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Like, I would have happily taken a later draft pick from a team to move him east as opposed to help the Edmonton Oilers fix their problems.
Right.
And here's the thing. He's still just 23. There's a size speed combo that is rare, right? Work ethic has never seemingly been an issue with Vasily. I'm not sure if you've heard any stains on him in that regard. I haven't heard, that we know of. I haven't heard of any off ice concerns. He got married at a young age. He had a child at a young age.
I mean, I think there was an element of learning to become a father and all the elements that come with that.
Right.
But that's not an unusual thing, I think.
But defensive acumen, forechecking, the sort of things that allow you to play, even if you're not a big scorer. Warren Fogle scored 20 goals for the Oilers last year. Please don't tell me Vasily's going to figure it all out and get on up to one of those levels. And, the fact that the Canucks never tried him. as the penalty killer. Where are you on that? Because I know J-Pat hammered that drum for some time.
Yeah.
They've got to get Podkolzin killing penalties. What says you?
Well, I mean, it's probably because I sit so often next to J-Pat that I can't help but agree with him. No, I was absolutely a point that I did find that curious. He seemed like a player you should have a go at that. They're constantly talking about, especially when the penalty killing was a disaster. Why not give him a go? That one always surprised me because he had the smarts. I thought he had the smarts. Maybe that's where the difference lay. That maybe the feeling was he didn't have the smarts for it. But he was responsible enough at 5-on-5 that you always thought that he could be that guy. There's a lot. I think we're going to sit here going, there's in the end a lot of kind of questions about what might have been and why not. And I don't know if we're ever necessarily going to get any answers.
We may never know, but there had to have been more than just Edmonton at play, right? Like 30 other teams. Would you have sent him somewhere else for even a lesser draft pick just so that he doesn't wind up?
I mean, that is the curious thing. What do the Canucks benefit from this by they're helping the Oilers out of jail? That's the other thing I did find myself. What did they get out of this? I was waiting for another shoe to drop, and then it became the CC trade, so it wasn't a Canucks related shoe to drop. It was.
And 4th round picks, 5th round picks, we've learned this. There's really no difference once you go 4 to 7. There's not a huge difference.
So it was just, I mean, listen, and it's kind of currency. It's trade currency, but the odds of you finding a player in that's of any consequence now more than ever after the second round is very low. So you're not really moving. More than anything, what the Canucks do is that they've gotten out of that's one less NHL contract, right? Like that's the thing. They're down to 48 now.
Which brings me to what Thomas Drance tweeted.
Yeah.
They still have 48 contracts on the 50 limit. And Drance wonders whether making another deal of this sort would probably be helpful for flexibility purposes. What do you think?
I mean, yes, absolutely. You sit back and you look at the roster and you're like, well, who else is there they could actually do? I mean, they've gone and signed 4 wingers, so they're not training on those guys. You assume they want to keep Dakota Joshua. You assume they want to keep Connor Garland.
I think you're further down the pecking order in terms of moving a contract.
Looking at our
You've signed defensemen too.
Yeah, I'm now looking at Nils Höglander.
No.
Like that's, but
you are or you're not.
Well, I'm just saying that's the only, in the end, if we're talking about a deal like that at this point, or are you somehow finding someone to take Nils Oman? I'm not sure. I get what Thomas is saying. I'm just not sure what that deal actually would be, because unless you're looking to shuffle things around, perhaps you're finding that defenseman that you've been wanting to add.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure how this one plays out at this point.
Well, speaking of the shuffle, there is plenty of that at Canucks Sports Entertainment on the business side, and there has been for a good number of years there. Staying power is not exactly something that has defined that operation. Tons of turnover, usually a job board full of postings. And you penned on this late last week. With Kate Pedersen will no longer be part of the in-house media team. Too bad. I thought Kate did a marvelous job. I thought she asked terrific questions. And frankly, oftentimes in this new media environment that we have now, where you've got fewer and fewer independent media on the road covering the team, Kate was invaluable to all of us left back here in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Being there on the beat, asking the questions, being around the team, reporting the news. I thought she did a marvelous job, but she's not going to be back, and it goes beyond that.
Explain. Well, yeah, turnover, it seems to have become the name of the game. And, for many years, that was a pretty stable place, whether, general managers come and go, coaches come and go, players come and go, but off the ice on the business side of things, it was a pretty stable place. But certainly since the pandemic, that has been less the case. Kate not returning earlier this summer, Lauren Finning deciding to leave
after just 1 year as a VP
9 months.
Yeah.
The turnover in the media department, Paul Albee, the longtime videographer, Andrew Ross, who just joined as well, one of the other videographers, both gone.
And Paul does marvelous work.
Paul's fantastic.
I've got enormous respect for Paul as a professional.
So, Terry Callan, who's the chief revenue officer they brought in from the Penguins a couple years ago, that stability, for whatever reason, behind the scenes is not been an ongoing
Well,
thing.
they still have a culture problem on the business side. I mean, I'm still waiting for the first person to tell me I absolutely love working for Michael Doyle and Francesco Aquilini. The culture problem that they've had on the business side, I mean, I think you go back to the letting go of Victor Debonis because it has been a turnstile of different heads until they landed on Michael Doyle. And then since Michael Doyle, it's been a turnstile at the level below the business chief. It is
what was the comment?
Look, they've done a marvelous job on the hockey operations side, in part they've done a marvelous job on the hockey side because of what we just talked about.
Yes.
Those three top 10 picks that turned out to be nothings for you. I mean, think of the hand that Rutherford and Alvin would have inherited if any of those guys were players. It would have made a big difference. And if all three of those guys are players, then maybe Jim Benning is still here. Yeah. But they've done a marvelous job, Rutherford and Alvin have, cleaning up Tocchet as well, cleaning up the hockey side of the operation. But I still think there's a way to go on the business side. And you're right, there were a lot of wounds from the pandemic, particularly the way ownership decided to handle the pandemic. There were certain ownership groups out there in pro sports who did their utmost to take care of everybody through what was a difficult period. There were others who looked at it as a reason to make cuts and trim from the budget. And we know which side the Canucks chose, because we all remember that offseason where all those players, Markstrom, Tanev, and others, were allowed to walk out the door as the taps were turned off. The one time we should say that the Aquilinis chose a more spendthrift approach on the hockey side, because for the most part, they have financed the hockey operations side very well, and in some cases taken advantage of what they have as a competitive advantage, and that is a big, robust hockey market that can drive revenues upwards of their peers in the NHL. You have a colleague who has written about Tom Wielander as one of the examples of what is going on now as NCAA hockey avails itself to this revolution going on in American collegiate athletics. NIL money, the transfer portal, which allows athletes to simply switch schools without having to sit out any kind of time. And oftentimes that is done because there is more money, NIL, name, image, and likeness money available elsewhere. Anyways, the NCAA has always banned major junior players, right?
Yep.
They consider that professional. And yet Tom Wielander, the Canucks pick, played professional games in Sweden and is now at Boston University. Explain the story.
My colleague Mike Raptis, sitting on the desk working yesterday, noticed a story to come over the wire from the Associated Press, I believe. Ryland Masterson, a young potential NCAA player who lost his college eligibility 2 years ago when he appeared in 2 exhibition games for the Windsor Spitfires at the age of 16. As Mike writes, the suit notes that NCAA bylaws allow participating professionals with the exception of men's ice hockey and skiing. Points out that players who competed professionally in Europe don't face the same restrictions, citing Canucks top defensive prospect Tom Wielander, specifically because he played 2 Swedish Hockey League games for Rögle before joining Boston University last year.
So there's a blatant hypocrisy there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the NCAA. I'm not shocked.
Yeah. And what I absolutely hated is hearing these stories of, kids getting called up to major junior teams, or at least the offer being there and having to make the decision in some cases at 16 years old. Do I step on this ice and forfeit all scholarship possibilities?
I don't know.
Forward?
Yeah. I mean,
I frankly, I don't understand it now that we're paying collegiate athletes. You now have collegiate football players, Patrick, who may not fit the NFL typecast, who are staying in college because they can make more NIL money than they would as a minimum salary NFL player.
Yeah.
I mean, that is astounding.
It's wild.
You've got some of that going on at the basketball level as well, although it's not quite as pronounced. the head coach at the University of Nebraska ended last year's football season by saying, I know all you guys want us to go out and get a transfer quarterback in the portal. I'm telling you right now, that'll cost us $1 million.
Right.
And basically putting the call out to alumni and donors, and especially those with financial wherewithal, saying, if you want a better football team, we need $1 million to go get a quarterback for next year. When you talk about that kind of money, we're talking about something that may masquerade as amateurism, much like the Olympics, but is in fact professional. So I've never understood it, and I think it does have to change at this stage.
It is the strangest restriction. I mean, the thing that fascinates me actually is the knock-on effects that will happen at the NHL level, because of course there's the CHL NHL agreement that limits where players can go and where they can do,
which is odd and hypocritical as well, because of course an American, a Swede, a Finn, a Russian can go play in the HL at age 19 and a Canadian can't. Although was there dispensation for Shane Wright recently? I didn't even get that.
Well, he was a conditioning, like there's conditioning, like the whole thing's, it's just ludicrous. And but it comes back to your point about being 16 years old, and you hear so many of these stories of people basically saying, well, I didn't know. And well, because there's incentives here. Like there's an incentive there for the CHL team to sort of not tell you, and the restriction, and now more than ever, like this lawsuit's highlighting, the restrictions make no sense, because like, why is Tom Wielander different from a kid who played 2 exhibition games and received, I guess, a stipend for training camp? Right. Like, what's the difference? So and what's the difference between allowing a player, like, let's just remember how it works for development camp, right? So Canucks have Aku Koskenvuo, who is
the Finnish goaltender they drafted Harvard, several years ago,
right? And so he pays his own way to come to development camp, right? He's around professionals,
and let's just explain that he pays his own way to get to development camp, because the moment he takes money from the Canucks,
he's
or
not
in-kind benefits, he forfeits NCAA
under these rules
eligibility, even though he could go out and sign a sponsorship deal for way more money and retain the eligibility. This is the sort of this is what we're dealing with here, folks.
It's ludicrous.
Clearly, a reckoning is coming there. The status quo with all the changes afoot in the NCAA and the NCAA high, and of course, this is going to have a big effect on the BCHL as well, right? Which is the primary.
Ongoing effect of the BCHL. Yeah,
the primary feeder of NCAA hockey, and it's just up in Penticton, and of course, the V's are so successful, and part of the reason why they're there's many reasons why the V's are successful. Coach Harbinson, the facility, the town, and all that, but it was a springboard to NCAA scholarships at some of the biggest NCAA ice hockey programs out there. Well, Return of the Lion King turns into an apology tour for Nathan Rourke and the British Columbia Lions. They lose 2011 to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, their arch nemesis, before 30,800 at BC Place. A massive crowd watches the home team go scoreless for the first 3 quarters. They do wind up putting 11 points on the board and fighting in the 4th quarter. Alas, it is another loss to Winnipeg. Winnipeg shut them out for 7 consecutive quarters until those 11 points in quarter 4. And they went into the game having allowed just 1 touchdown drive in the previous 40 possessions. It is pretty clear that Adam Bighill and that Bombers defense is pretty good. And it is also pretty clear that the BC Lions, after 4 losses in a row, are not very good right now.
I'm just curious to see where they're going to go. Like, I mean, Rourke, obviously, once he gets settled, I mean, I'm curious to hear what Farhan Lalji tells us about this, because I was sitting here. Here's a guy who hasn't played he played preseason. I get it, but hasn't played a competitive game in 2 years. The rust was always going to be there. I didn't think he would come in and be the savior right off the bat. I didn't expect it to be this poor. I do. To me, in the end, he sits back, he gets used to his receivers. They'll get somewhere. They'll score enough, but they just don't feel like they did a couple years ago, did they, Matt?
Rick, no. Rick, and look, I agree with you. You got to give Rourke more time here. Rick Campbell, the head coach, called it a whirlwind. To come on up from Atlanta to have the 3 days of practice and then get thrown right in, as you say, your first competitive game in nearly 2 years. And here's one of the reasons why we love Nathan Rourke. Here's one of the reasons why Nathan Rourke has been successful, and that is he understands one of the most difficult parts of the job of playing quarterback, and it's the most difficult position to play in all of sports. When things go well, you have to deflect credit. When things go poorly, you have to shoulder all the blame. Here is Nathan Rourke yesterday post-game meeting the media.
If you don't mind, if I'd like to say something, and hopefully I answers all your questions. I want to take this moment to publicly apologize. That was not my best football right there. As a quarterback here, it's never a one-person job, but it is the position where you have the ball in your hands every single play, and I didn't make enough plays. Obviously, I'm not going to sit here and make excuses in terms of it being a short week and getting into the offense again. And it's definitely a tough, tall task when you play a team like the Bombers who have been so successful. But I'm not going to make those excuses. I know that I'm better than this. I'm sorry to the team who stuck their necks out for me, for getting me here and allowing me to play. The rest of my teammates effort is never going to be an issue with this locker room. They fought right until the end, battled and got into the end zone on that last possession. Teams that have less character, they're not fighting at that time in the game. So I'm really proud of them. I'm sorry to the fans. I know there was a lot of excitement going in this game, and I didn't deliver. I'm going to be making sure that this is, if this is the starting point, then we only got up to go from here. The good news is that we got a short week, quick turnaround. Good news is that we're still early in the season, and it's anybody's ball game in the West.
I mean, it's letter perfect. It's syllable perfect, right? Like that's how you want a starting quarterback and a star quarterback to sound. Now, he's probably being a little too rough on himself. But by the same token, the stat line is abysmal. 8 of 25 for 126 yards and 2 interceptions. One of them returned for a touchdown.
Guy who set the single season accuracy record.
No, I know.
Couldn't hit a
I
receiver.
know. And Glenn Suter made the point on the broadcast. He was holding the ball longer than what we were accustomed to when last he showed up here. Now, let's also remember it was a different cast of receivers back then, and it does take time for the quarterbacks and the receivers to forge some sort of chemistry. The other thing is the running game was working, so that excuse wasn't really there.
No.
Standback goes for 100 yards, and the defense played well enough to keep them in the ball game. I mean, Oliveira has a pretty good game here. Dembski was outstanding for the Bombers. Collaros was pretty damn good, but that is a game that's winnable despite how putrid you've been on offense into the fourth quarter.
Was it all just rhythm? I mean, it's different field, 3 downs, like just the way you have to manage things is different. Where you're looking is different. You've been running practice reps for so long on an NFL field, thinking NFL football, and this is just the difference. And I think it won't take long next time out.
Yeah, well, and I heard Coach Campbell on CKNW this morning mention that he, like Rourke mentioned, loves the fact that it's a short week, that there's not a lot of time to suck on this loss and, feel sorry for yourself and all of those things. They're in Ottawa on Saturday, afternoon for us, night there, which means you're on a plane, you're doing your walkthrough on Friday, which means Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you have a good week of practice here after a day off. God knows the practice is going to be required. They've got some guys nicked as well. You take a look at their injury report now week to week, and you see more and more names, guys who are missing, if not a full practice week, but a practice here and there. Doesn't get any easier. I mean, Ottawa's been a very good team so far this year. Second place in the East, just the 2 defeats, the 1 draw as well. God, I hate looking at draws in a football standings column. And of course, that is where Rick Campbell once came from. I don't think anyone's in trouble yet, nor should they be. But a couple of things to remember as we go forward, because I mean, the lines were sitting pretty there at one point.
Yeah.
The lines were sitting pretty there at 5-1. And like so much so to the point where Blake and I started wondering, could this be a Battle of the Titans Grey Cup with a BC Lions team and a Montreal Alouettes team with not very many losses between them facing off in November? Well, they've lost 4 in a row. They're actually negative now in the point differential, 3-2 at home. And boy, you hate losing like that in front of a big crowd. I mean, you're going to lose by putting up a ton of points. But 5-5, a half game back of Saskatchewan in the West, but just a single game ahead now of Winnipeg and Calgary. And once again, the Blue Bombers look like their big brother in this rivalry. Ottawa 6-2-1. And as I was going to say, a couple of things to remember. Amar Doman did not hire Rick Campbell. Ed Hervey hired Rick Campbell, if you remember way back when, in the pandemic season. And of course, they had the connection from both at one time being in Edmonton. The other thing is that final season for Campbell with the Red Blacks, it completely got away from them and it fell apart to the tone of a 3-15 season. Now, I don't think the Lions are going to be horrible the rest of the way. I think this is a blip. The CFL season goes in ebbs and valleys, ebbs and flows. But I do think that they've got to get to this together at some point during this 2-game set against the Red Blacks, because of course we've got the big Touchdown Pacific game coming up.
Well, and this is
a couple weeks.
I mean, this is the moment. I mean, the way your season goes in the CFL, there's always this turn as we hit Labor Day, right? Like you get, partly it's because of the way the rosters are going to evolve because of the NFL and things like that. But you just find your way, and all the way you looked at the beginning is often not the way you looked at the end. Talk about perfect timing getting Nathan Rourke in, because you're going to look at pushing yourself forward against some tough opposition. You need to turn yourself in the direction that you should be going in, which is the team that you were the last 2 seasons. But it's a results business. I mean, it's the old thing. It's a results-based business, and if they're not finding their way, Amar Doman is not going to sit around.
Yeah, I know they got some guys nicked in the receiver group, and you could perhaps argue that the offensive line wasn't as good as it was looking there at one point, or at least that Vernon Adams was able to hang in and complete balls down the field. Alas, they've got to get better on the offensive side of the ball, because they've been very difficult to watch here over this 4-game lose. I mean, the game yesterday, the other game against Winnipeg where they got shut out, I mean, it was toothpick time with the eyeballs, because there was some really dreary offensive football being played, and that is a tough watch in the CFL when it's 2 and out.
Well, and that's what's been so fun about them. That's why there's been buzz. That's why there's been buzz about this team coming into the season. Right?
They were incredible to watch. The Rourke year earlier
Adams,
this year,
like what however they were running, they were running things. They were a fun team to watch with the ball.
Yeah. Let's get to today's menu, and it is brought to you by Greta Bar. Greta, fantastic spot to catch the game throughout the season. A quick walk to the Rinker Stadium. Greta, go-to spot for food, drink, fun before, after the game. Make it a game night at Greta, 50 West Cordova, or at gretabar.com. You mentioned Farhan Lalji is coming up, TSN's West Coast Bureau Chief. We will talk Vasily Podkolzin with him, and then pivot to this Lions performance. We will talk to John Shannon, former producer, executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada, on the trade between the Canucks and Oilers. John does a lot of work on the Edmonton side of things, so is able to add some insight there. That is all coming up on today's show, and we should make a show note for the next few weeks. We are going to be twice a week, Monday, Friday this week, Tuesday, Friday next week. Time for our Bet365 bets of the day, Peach. I know this is your first go at it. Is this your first time co-hosting this show?
It is.
Oh, wow.
Been at the other show.
Well, you've done Rinkwide, you've done Canucks Conversation.
Yes. It's the first time here.
Wow.
With you anyway. No, yeah, first time with the big show.
Well, you're doing great.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking some time. Now we need a winner on your Bet365 bet of the day. This segment brought to you by Bet365, proud partner of Sekeres and Price. I've seen you tweeting about rugby. You are Vancouver's foremost rugby expert, so give them a winner on the rugby side?
Well, we had rugby champions is on a 2-week break. So they're not back till the end of next week.
Okay.
So just bear with me here.
So you have some time.
We have some time.
But you may want to get in on this number while it's still juicy, right?
I think that's why I'm looking at it. We're looking at South Africa, New Zealand. We'll be in Johannesburg next Saturday, the 31st.
One of the classic rivalries
Huge
in all
rivalry.
of world rugby, right? Who can forget Invictus?
Among many
No, it's
things.
true.
Yeah. But,
it's still one of my favorite documentaries. The 16th Man is an extraordinary watch.
The New Zealand All Blacks, the one rugby team that everybody knows, right? They aren't the All Blacks that they have been, but they're still a powerful team. They're in Johannesburg. Right now, they are 340 on the money line.
Like, when are the All Blacks ever?
I get it. They're on the road. They're traveling. South Africa's a tough place to play, no matter who you are.
But it's still the All Blacks.
Listen, guys, I'm not saying this is guaranteed, but I'm like, that's something something to consider.
This is one of the great rep teams the world over. USA basketball, Canadian hockey, New Zealand rugby.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about competition to make a team.
Yes.
You know, you got those, or you got some other ones also, but yes, truly one of the giants in global sport, the All Blacks. Shout out to Ambassador Paul, our loyal listener down there in New Zealand. So here's the thing for me. I'll bet that winning a preseason game means more for Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce, who of course took over last year midstream, than it does for San Francisco's Kyle Shanahan. And particularly since this is 2 preseason games in pretty close succession here for the 49ers. And I bet it means more to Pierce because today he named Gardner Minshew his starting quarterback. And let's face it, for as much fun as Minshew is, and he is a lot of fun, I'm not sure he's one of the best starting quarterbacks out there. In fact, on the rank of 1 to 32, I think he'd rank pretty close to 32 for starting quarterbacks in this NFL season. So I'm going to bet that Pierce wants some good vibes going through that room Thursday when they face their former Bay Area rivals, San Francisco. Give me the Raiders, also an underdog, plus 100 to win in NFL preseason action on Thursday. Bet365, open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365, and use code VANBONUS when opening that account. Thanks for this, Peach. Farhan Lalji coming up next.
In a season like this, you never want to miss a single second of what's happening on the ice, and you want to be around your fellow fans, right? Well, Greta Bar YVR at 50 West Cordova, the perfect spot to do so. Hey, if you've got tickets, a great place to pre and post. They've got drink specials every single day. And if you don't have tickets, well, stick around and soak up the atmosphere with all your fellow fans, play all the great video games and air hockey, great air hockey setup as well at Greta Bar YVR. We'll see you there, 50 West Cordova.
We're joined now by TSN's West Coast correspondent based in Vancouver for the last 25 years, Farhan Lalji. How are you? Missed you last week.
Good. You're underselling my lineage in Vancouver.
I thought it was 25 years with TSN.
Well, it's 27 with TSN, 30 total in the industry from here.
Oh, wow.
From here, my friend.
Okay. So 27-year correspondent Farhan Lalji, that only makes him older.
No, I know. He's banking for old age now.
Yeah.
Pension and all that stuff.
What did you make of the Podkolzin trade?
I was surprised, right? I thought they would give him another camp. The fact that they only got a 4th-round pick for him. Look, I guess that's where his value is at this point, so you can't really complain about the acquisition cost, but I thought they'd give him some time. I know they've added more in their bottom 6. When we looked at the math, a lot of people felt he had a lot of work to do to get into the top 12 for the team, but I think that he's still got a skill set that they can benefit from, but surprised with a small S, I suppose. This is the stage where a number of first-round picks who don't have it work out within their existing organizations look for a change, and the team looks for a change, and this is where we're at with Podkolzin.
What about the fact that, as you said, there were 12 guys? Like, where was he going to play, I guess? Who could he be beaten out, you think?
Well, when you look at it and who they acquired, it's not like he's going to beat out Kiefer Sherwood, right? We thought he could beat out a Nils Oman. We thought he could beat out a Phil DiGiuseppe, right? Like those were kind of the guys that you thought 13 forward mix. So I thought, there was certainly more ceiling there, and he's got some physicality to his game, and could you get him back to that point? His last full-time NHL season where he was able to produce offensively, but ultimately this is a player that I think for the last couple of years the Canucks have been looking for to dominate at the American. He just hasn't done that, right? He's had moments, but he hasn't really done what he should do based on his pedigree there to be a slam dunk to eventually be added here. So I think they were just kind of at a crossing of the road here, and you had to figure out where you want to go with them. And this is probably a good thing for a player. You kind of wonder about that in your own division, don't you?
Well, and I'm getting to that here in a second, but help me out. Like, where did things go wrong here, Farhan? Because that 20-year-old season we thought he could build off of. What was your understanding of why it went south for Vasily from there?
Well, I mean, there's so, as opposed to, including what's going on at home and just kind of what his role is and where he sits within the organization. And, there's been a lot of that. And so I think he's just kind of, I don't want to say he's fallen through the cracks because I do think he's been given opportunity. I don't think he was one that necessarily responded well to the coaching change. Didn't like one coach or the other, but just in terms of change of system, right? This system under Rick Tocchet is a lot more exacting and detailed, and I think he struggled with that, right? I mean, we know what the physical skill set is, but like with any player, you've got to really excel in one area, and it just becomes the ultimate tweener, right? That if you are going to score like Kuzmenko the first year, you'll live with the warts. When you don't score, you don't live with the warts. And so if Vasily Podkolzin is not really going to excel in one particular area, then you don't live with the deficiencies. And I think the coaching change, as much as anything else, hurt the player.
It's interesting you mentioned the system, and I think he actually played the system well. But in the end, there were moments where he needed to do more. He needed to take the puck to the net, and that's something he really seemed to struggle with in the end, didn't he?
Well, and what was he, right? Take the puck to the net implies you're a power forward. And we know he's a big physical guy, but was he going to be that guy? Was he going to, we assume he was going to be a winger, even though he's had some time at center in his career previously. Is he going to be we've talked about him as a potential top six guy that maybe he can fit in alongside of JT Miller and play that direct game. And we've talked about him in a checking role or a middle six role or a bottom six role. Look, this guy's got to at least bring penalty killing utility if he's going to be a mainstay on this roster. And you just wonder what exactly he is. And I just don't think he ever defined that.
The thing that I struggle with is this should be a Tocchet prototype, right? Size, can move, forechecker. Like Rick Tocchet seemed the tailor-made coach for Vasily Podkolzin, and yet it didn't come to pass.
Yeah, and it's a totally fair point because when you looked at him, I felt the same way. But he never played any side of that game consistently. We never saw him as a forward who could have that kind of impact. We never saw him as a defensive shutdown guy. Again, we never saw him as a penalty killer. There were a number of things that when you look at the physical skill set, it should have worked. But for whatever reason, it didn't. And I think that there's another life for this kid. Like, I think he could be a pain in the ass for the Canucks while here in Edmonton. And I think that given where Edmonton is with their salary cap, I think he's going to get much more runway there than he did in Vancouver. So I think we're going to see this guy as an everyday player in that lineup. And they need some young guys, especially if they wind up losing out on Holloway. And I know it was designed to free up some cap space so they could keep Broberg. But, if you lose Holloway, who's got a bit more scoring pedigree than Podkolzin, where does he fit? But I just think he's going to be a mainstay. They have no young players, right? Like he all of a sudden becomes one of their important young players. So he'll get an opportunity there. And
yeah, and you mentioned that it was designed to help them try and keep Broberg, and then they make the other trade with San Jose last night, and lo and behold, it looks like they're going to have the flexibility and cap space now to keep both of those players. So our poll question is, will Vasily come back to haunt the Canucks? It sounds like you're voting yes, Farhan.
Well, I think he's good. Depends on what your expectation or what your definition of haunt is, right? Is he going to come back and score hat tricks against the Canucks or 3-point nights against the Canucks on the regular? I don't think so. But I think he's going to be a valuable player for Edmonton. And the Canucks will look at that and wonder what could have been if we had handled things differently. But look, I don't think this guy's going to be a 30-goal scorer in the National Hockey.
In the short term, I mean, you look at the Edmonton lineup and who he has to play more than, and
which he should have been here.
Yeah, you look at Edmonton, but is he going to beat Connor Brown? Is he going to beat Corey Perry? Like, those are guys that he is currently fighting to get more ice time than. He's not going to play more than Janmark. He's not going to play more than Derek Ryan. But there is a runway here for him to get at least a regular shift and turn himself into at least a third liner there.
Edmonton does have to shed a $800,000 plus player to get cap compliant if they match the offer sheets from the existing lot. So that could be Brown, that could be Emberson, that could be Ryan or whatnot. But I would suspect that he, like you say, that he's going to get an opportunity there. Farhan, we were musing in the opening segment, like a fourth round pick. Would you have just taken a fifth or a sixth to send him somewhere other than Edmonton if that was available to you?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it probably tells you a lot about what they think of the player, right? In terms of his ability to haunt them. I absolutely would have taken less to send him out of the division because, I still think there's something there if he gets with the right coach and gets with the right system. Look, anybody can score alongside of Connor McDavid, and I'm not suggesting Podkolzin is going to play up there with he or Draisaitl, but I would have done that. I don't think you take that chance. It's not worth it when you look at the odds of a fourth-round pick hitting and even the value of a fourth-round pick as a trade chip, in a bigger deal. I absolutely would have done what I could to move him outside of the division.
Did they err not moving him sooner? Should they have come to the conclusion that he wasn't going to realize top 10 pick potential and it was time to move him earlier when maybe there was a little more bloom on the rose?
It's a good question, but I think when a new regime comes, you want to give them an opportunity. And I think this organization has been bereft of prospects, right? So if you've got a guy like that and he hasn't hit, treat him like an ascending asset within your organization when you've got a new group, right? Because that new group should have given him the reset. And, it really didn't. So if you trade him a year ago, what do you get? A third-round pick? I'm not sure what his value was at that point in the game, right? So you kind of give him an opportunity to see what you can harvest. So now it's they're selling at pennies on the dollar. There's no doubt about it, but I don't know that there would have been that much more value to move him earlier.
Here's the thing to understand about 10th round picks, guys. This is from former Canucks Army guy.
10th overall, you mean?
10th overall picks. This is from former Canucks Army guy Jackson McDonald. There have been 61 10th overall picks in the history of the NHL. In terms of games played, Vasily Podkolzin is currently 46th. He plays about 150 more games. He'll be halfway. He'll make himself to 31st. Do you know who the 31st most games played in the history of 10th overall picks in the NHL is? Do you know who it is? It's Cody Hodgson.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's
a cursed number is what you're telling me at the draft?
That's the play. I mean, that's the Cody Hodgson in many ways is the average 10th overall pick.
Oh, my God.
Right? So,
that can't be.
Number 32 is Rick Blight. There's been a lot of 10th overall picks in Vancouver Canucks history. But the point is that, basically what you said for him, what else are you going to get for him? I mean, maybe you got a third round pick, but the player in the end is kind of what a 10th overall pick is at this point. He's not.
I refuse to believe that.
He should have been better.
There have been busts there that this is the value we assign to a 10th overall pick.
That's what I'm saying is that I'm just saying that this is a guy that he should have been better. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But there's just a lot of bad. There's just a lot of bad there, and so the bar is very low, and they didn't clear it, and that goes back to the original selection. I would say.
Well, moving along, Farhan, because you covered the game yesterday at BC Place, we went from promotional tour, sort of, to apology tour pretty quickly with Nathan Rourke. Why was he so bad? Why were the Lions so bad against their arch nemesis? And, the specter of the W only grows now after another dominant win from the Bombers over the Leos yesterday at BC Place.
In Nathan's case, he was pressing. There's no doubt about it. And I think it's going to take some time, right? Like, look, nobody thinks more of this player than me. You know that. You're probably going to dunk on me for that. And that's all well and good. But, and I'm not walking any of that back, right? Like, I still think extremely highly of for him to come across country, have 3 practices, only 1 practice with the entire offensive group, and expect him to come in and be Nathan Rourke of 2022. I just think that was unreasonable, not only for the fan base or any media who felt he was going to come out and just run it back immediately, but also for the player himself, because he expected a lot of himself, and we saw that in his post-game comments. I asked him the day before the game that, should people temper expectations, right? Because of what you've been through and the fact that this is a really good team. And he's like, yeah, they probably should. But I don't think he's given himself any grace. But you could see in the game that he was pressing. There's some big problems on that BC Lions offense. And everybody thought that Nathan Rourke could come in and Band-Aid, but he couldn't, right? These receivers are a little banged up. Guys aren't getting separation. It was the exact same game plan that Winnipeg put forward in the last game. And it was the exact same game plan that Calgary put forward the game before that. Who would have thought that in the last 4 games, the best quarterback performance from a Lion might have been Jake Dolegala against Edmonton? Now that defense, isn't great, right? But it was a tough situation for him. It was a tough ask, and I think he's only going to get better.
How long till he finds his feet, you think, Farhan? I mean, this is a guy who hasn't actually played a competitive game in 2 years. I mean, obviously he played preseason action in the NFL, but he hasn't played a real game with real defenders coming at him since 2022.
I think it'll take a couple of games. And, to me, I think things are going to get really interesting here, because if he stumbles again in Ottawa, then have a real decision to make on Labor Day weekend when they play Touchdown Pacific in Ottawa. So, look, I don't think he's going to have the performance he just had. What was he, 8 of 23? Like, it was really, really bad, or 8 of 25. I don't think he's going to play like that again. I do think the next step will be taken forward, but what level of step will that be? I think it's better with another week of practice and another week of film and another chance to get the ball out to different portions of the CFL field. Like, it looked great in practice, but it's different when you're facing a full pass rush. You could see his timing was off on some of the sideline throws. He was late on the second interception, I believe it was. And, so there's a little bit of that. Also look at the fact that while it's the same playbook, this is almost an entirely different receiving corps, because when you look at the stars of that team in 2022, Brian Burnham, Dom Rhymes, Lucky Whitehead, all gone, right? Keon Hatcher was their 4. Alex Hollins was the X that came in and out of the lineup based on injury. Javon Katoya was there, but isn't really a big factor in the pass game. So, there's also that he's got to get figured out. And when you look at Hollins and McInnes, their production has really dropped in the last month. So there's a lot of issues that need to get addressed, and can lead to better quarterback play or include better quarterback play on Saturday.
Can you explain this to me? Because, and forgive me, Farhan, I was away last week, but I was reading everything after the Rourke signing. So he's getting paid somewhat out of a promotional budget?
Well, that years. I don't know how much of his 2024 salary is tied in marketing, but there is a clause that was put in to the CFL a couple of years ago that allowed players to receive marketing funds that were in the contract. It's not like brown bag money on the side.
Okay.
It's in the contract, but it doesn't get tied to the salary cap, right?
Right.
So as it was initially put out there in Nathan's contract, that in the next 2 years, $200,000 in each year is going to be tied to marketing, which doesn't come on the cap. And I believe somewhere between 1 and 125 this year, and I stand to be corrected, is tied to marketing as well. So now ultimately, you can't just give it to him. You've got to demonstrate how he earned it. But it's going to be tough for him to, it'll be tough for them to demonstrate how they're going to earn $200,000. So
right, and particularly
we'll see what
when
that eventually looks like.
Yeah, and particularly when the head coach puts a one-on-one ban, interview ban on the player in his first week. Like he did TSN because you're the rights holder, but he didn't do any other one-on-ones. So you're paying him to do promotional stuff. You have to prove that he does promotional stuff. And the head coach didn't want him doing one-on-one interviews. It doesn't seem like Doman and Campbell were on the same page here with this player, at least for this first week.
That's That's the first I'm hearing of the no one-on-one.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, there was a lot of media there the first day.
Yeah, he
and
did
everybody got him
scrums
got
and
what
he
was
did
needed.
post games, but he wasn't apparently going to do any one-on-ones outside of what was required in the TSN pregame for the week. So, anyways, that struck me as odd.
Let me odd too. I probably have to ask a couple of questions around that. But that, look, Nathan's not. He doesn't love the media. He's good when he's on.
He's really good at it.
He's comfortable and he talks and says what he needs to. But generally, he doesn't like it. But I don't think there's going to be a lot of no-fly zones.
Generally, if you don't, generally doesn't like it. Well, you just signed a contract that behooves you to do those sorts of things. Let me ask this.
Absolutely.
Let me ask this. Do you think anybody is in trouble if this continues? I mean, that's 4 losses in a row. And as you say, they did not look like they had a lot of answers over the last couple of weeks. Do you think Rick or anybody on the coaching staff could be in trouble? Well, I'm talking mostly coaches, but you tell me if there's some bigger name players who might be playing their last games for the Lions here.
I don't think the coaching staff is in trouble. I do think if this continues to spiral and they miss the playoffs, I don't think they're going to sit on this for a while, right? And I'm curious to see what that decision-making hierarchy or protocol looks like. But, Rick Campbell is one of those coaches who believes the answer is stability. And I think they need to make a little more change to the roster. It's an organization that when they first play young players, they had that kind of rope. And you could see certain players ascending within the organization. And, Nathan was one of them, right? But, you look at names like Josh Banks and Manny Rugamba, they went through growing pains. Now they're not necessarily willing to do that. So, there are issues on both sides of the ball here. I mean, really bad, personnel-wise. They lack playmakers at every level. You take away Sione Tuhema and maybe Gary Peters, who I think are on the real high end. And then there's a couple of guys, maybe a TJ Lee or a Banks or a Rugamba that's kind of at the solid end. And after that, boy, I'm raising my eyes at the entire roster. Against Winnipeg, both games, I think they played as well as they could have. This team, if they need to win games, they have to win them 35-30. That's the way it's got to look. So the offense isn't doing it. I don't think Jordan McSimmick's getting fired. I don't think Kelly Bates is getting fired. I don't know that there's a quick fix answer, and I don't know that the owner will shake the room up. But certainly if this continues, in the offseason, all bets are off. But I would imagine there's no easy solution. I mean, could you fire Rick Campbell and put in Mike Benavides, who's got head coaching experience for the rest of the year? I suppose you could, but I don't know that necessarily solves the problem, because I think the problems with this team are personnel-based currently.
No quick fix, you said, but which is the quicker fix, the offense or the defense?
The offense. Yeah, the offense has the tools. Because to me, when you look at Justin McInnis, Alex Hollins, Keon Hatcher, and Javon Catoy, you should have the basis of a top 3 receiving core in the league, right? That's a deep accomplished at some point in time in their careers. William Stanback is an exceptional running back. Nathan Rourke and even Vernon Adams, they've got the ability to make a poor offensive line look good, or at least tread water, right? Nathan always had that ability to get the ball out of his hands quick. Vernon's a bit more of a downfield passer, but both of those guys are elite quarterbacks. They're there if they put guys in the right spots. And I think there's a little stubbornness there, right? I love what I've seen with the run game. Get the screen game happening a little bit more, right? Make some of those easy things happen that other teams do that the Lions don't. So I think there are some fixes and solutions there offensively. Defensively is there.
Lastly, you were here a week ago with Blake and Jeff. You called Rourke a top 10 quarterback on the planet, Farhan? You think he's better than
I said top 20.
Top 30, top 20. Sorry, my bad. Top 20. You think he's better than a third of the NFL starters, Farhan?
I think he has the ability to be a mid-level starter in the National Football League. I really do. Okay. And at the end of the day, top 20 means that. That means you could be an average NFL starter, right? Mm-hmm. And I doubled down on it this weekend when I saw Gardner Minshew get the start for right, which is a place I really wish he would have landed at some point in time. And I probably should have said could be or can get to be, as opposed to saying he is. But I was emphatic in that moment. So if there's a slight walk back there, maybe there is. But I really player. And look, when we watch the NFL guys, we watch the Patrick Mahomes of the world. But I watch the other end of rosters, and I see what's there. And so much of it is timing and opportunity. And I question how much of that he got, because I know a little more about what happened in each of those situations than I'm able to. I'll give you an example. I got a call from somebody I know with the Chargers the night before he signed with the Lions. What happened to Nathan Rourke? And I kind of shared with them what I knew. And they said to me, I love this guy, and I think he could play in our league. And about to the next day, like, they were going to make one more call to one of the teams that he was with, and we're going to recommend that Rourke to Jim Harbaugh. The next morning, he signed with the BC Lions. You think if he had waited 2 more days that the Vikings might have called to just kind of be in that room once the JJ
right?
Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't have. I don't know, but like, so much of it is timing and opportunity. He did not play well in the Falcons game. There's no doubt, but there's some context around that. But for me, I just think that I believe in the player, and I believe in his commitment and work ethic to it. And look, it's like when Nathan Rourke went to the NFL, Lucky Whitehead said to me, the only quarterback I've ever played with that's better than that guy is Tony Romo, right? Adam Bighill believes he can play in the NFL. Adam Bighill spent a year in the NFL. All of these guys that are in this league that level have either spent time in the NFL or have played with quarterbacks that have played in the NFL. So it's not just me. And
Farhan, let me jump in.
Believe that what we saw in 2022 is different.
The politics of the NFL.
Back there.
Yeah, the politics of the NFL are toxic, and in some cases, you would need an owner, a head coach, an offensive coordinator, and a quarterback coach to sign off on putting a CFL guy under center in a meaningful game. And the fact is, there are just not enough cojones in most NFL teams that suite of people are all going to green light that sort of move, because of course the CFL remains a punchline in the
and on the flip side of that coin,
circles.
Look at who retired. Colt McCoy gets 15 years in the
exactly,
NFL, right?
Exactly.
And
Well, sure. And, Nathan Peterman gets, still got run in the NFL after a few handful of starts. Now, I'm not as much, like in terms of that particular narrative, right? I don't think he's disliked because he's a CFL guy. I think, Nathan Rourke is an undrafted free agent by NFL standards. You want to know who is one pick away from being an undrafted free agent? Brock Purdy. And if you really look at Brock Purdy's skill set, right, in terms of his size, his athleticism, do you really think there's a significant gap there? But here's what happened. Brock Purdy, who's one pick away from being a UDFA, and, to your point about alignment and cojones within an organization, Brock Purdy goes to San Francisco, and Kyle Shanahan, who has big-time juice in that building, is able to go to John. The guy that we took with the last pick in the draft, who's our number 3? Well, he's better than the guy we traded 3 first-round picks
That's right.
for.
Yeah, that's right.
And we need to figure that out. And John Lynch said, okay. And they did it, right? Because they've got that level of power, alignment, security.
That's it.
All of it to make those
That's my
decisions.
point for Giants. That's
Raheem
my
Morris
point.
is just getting started in Atlanta, and those things they factor in a bit.
That's right. Marvelous stuff. You're a great sport. Thank you for this. We'll catch up soon, my friend.
See you, boys. PJ, I hope you're having a good summer. Love the fact that both of you are wearing Canadians hats and not Blue Jay hats.
Big series coming up against the Everett Aqua Sox. Of course, the affiliate of that team down south.
I'll have to tear JJ away. I'll show up at Alliance practice soon enough.
Please do. See you, boys.
The Vancouver Canadians are back at the Nat. Catch fireworks, giveaways, and Friday nooners all spring and summer long. Get your tickets at CanadiansBaseball.com.
Joined now by the former executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada, the co-host of the Bob McCown podcast, and he does a lot of work in the Alberta capital covering the Oilers. It's our pleasure to welcome John Shannon back to the program. How are you?
I'm great, Matt. Hey, Patrick, how are you?
Hey.
What do you make of this trade?
Well, if you obviously somebody in Vancouver was not as thrilled with Podkolzin at this point than they were when they signed him and then tried to nurture him through time in Abbotsford. At the same time, this is just trying to rearrange chairs in Edmonton to try to find a way to make sure that if they do lose Dylan Holloway, they have a competent replacement, or if they in fact can and decide to sign both Holloway and Broberg, that they have some depth. So it's, draft picks are draft picks. That's part of the lottery world that we live in. But when you look at warm bodies, this is the Oilers probably thinking that they might have to have a little bit of insurance in the forward position if indeed in the next 24 hours they decide that they don't want to sign Dylan Holloway.
Do you think Podkolzin stands a better chance of realizing potential, even if it's not still top 10 overall pick potential, John, in Edmonton than he did here in Vancouver?
No, I don't actually. I think it's probably it would be better to ask Patrick the question: is it could you define what Podkolzin is?
Yeah,
I'm not sure anybody really knows what he is and what he can do. He shows glimmers. He shows great glimmers of hope, and then regresses. And so I don't know. I'm sorry to be repetitive. This is a warm body. This is a warm body at this point. That's all I can see it as. I
just go with I cited earlier in the summer something Ray Ferraro once said about a different Canucks first round winger. But the moment they stop asking you to do more, they're quickly going to start asking you to do less, and that's not a good place to be. And that's
and the other thing from that whole perspective of being a first round pick, the Oilers potentially could lose 2 first round picks tomorrow, so they can at least then publicly say, "Well, we got a first round pick back." Whether that's it is factually accurate that they did get a first round pick back, but what that first round pick is another story.
So you don't think Podkolzin will in any way, shape, or form come back to haunt the Vancouver Canucks, or making this move and providing Edmonton a depth forward should they lose Holloway is not going to come back to haunt?
Yeah, and I don't think that it's a vicious repercussion of the Canucks signing Vinny Desharnais either. So.
Or Kiefer Sherwood or Daniel Sprong, for that matter. Spent enough time with those fellas.
Well, yeah. So this is, we're talking small potatoes in a world of big potatoes. It's small potatoes.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, how important do you think Broberg and Holloway are to the Oilers program? Not just this coming year, John, but in future years, because as you mentioned, they are both first-round picks.
Well, if you had asked me 12 months ago, how important are they, I might have had a different opinion. But what we saw out of them, particularly in the playoffs, you said, "Holy smokes!" They let them ripen in the American League. They gave them an opportunity at the right period of time, and both of them proved their value. I think it's imperative that they match. I really do. I think that there's enough philosophy in the organization that they think they should match both of them, because you can't afford to lose first round picks willy-nilly, and you can't afford to lose 2 first round picks, ones that you've now invested years in trying to make them part of your success. Broberg is one of those guys that I know they probably, regret not signing during the regular season. If in fact he would have signed in the regular season, I'm not convinced he would have, because remember, this is a guy that did ask at some point, or someone asked on his behalf for a trade. And Dylan Holloway was injured for much of the last 2.5 years. But when they had an opportunity to play in the playoffs, to play against the Canucks and LA and Dallas, they proved themselves to be very valuable to the organization. So I think it's imperative they sign both. And I do believe there's enough philosophy inside the organization to think that. And that's why we're seeing these moves like the CC trade. And I would not be surprised to see something else today or first thing in the morning tomorrow.
Underneath all that, how long is Evander Kane going to be out if he does actually have surgery? That's the thing that no one seems to know, but perhaps you know.
Well, maybe Mark Stone could answer that for us. I mean, seriously.
Good, Shannon.
Well, when will Evander Kane, his true value be necessary? And I'm not saying You know, it's a difficult surgery. I was told, gosh, within a week of him being on the shelf, that he was going LTIR. He was going to be an LTIR when the season started. That was it. There was no discussion. So they're going to take their time with Evander Kane. And so how long that is and how long they feel that they can heal him, then that's another question for the doctors and for Stan Bowman now, who will buy himself some time, maybe a couple of months, maybe 3 months, to find a way to get under the cap with Kane on the active roster.
Do you think this would have all gone down if Kenny Holland was still the general manager of the Edmonton?
I've heard Elliott's comments on this, and he said, "Oh no, it wouldn't have happened." I disagree. And Doug Armstrong has no loyalty to Ken Holland as a hockey manager. Doug Armstrong has obviously no loyalty to Stan Bowman. Doug Armstrong's job is to make the St. Louis Blues a contender again. And Doug Armstrong was tutored by two of the most vindictive, vicious, competitive people in the history of the game, who would have put both offer sheets in, and that's Bob Clark and Bob Gainey. So this to me is business with this collective bargaining agreement in 2024. And Doug Armstrong has no loyalty to his pals. He has loyalty to his ownership and to his fan base and to the Blues.
Might we see some more offer sheets then? Is this uncork something that we all want?
No, I mean, it's, I think we all like it. I think that it's kind of cool. But as you know, Patrick, if you've looked at it in the last decade, it kind of ebbs and flows. You know, it's this and that, and then there's that one manager who has enough money in his pocket to say, well, but doesn't have very much equity in draft picks to say, well, I'd like to do it, but I don't have draft picks, which is what Doug actually had to do to go back to get the pick back from Pittsburgh. So from that perspective, I think that it goes with the tide, and it goes just enough for everybody who negotiated that CBA to say, you see, there is no such thing as being enslaved until you're 26. You have that opportunity to move as a restricted free agent.
Assuming these are unsuccessful offer sheets, does it tell us something about Armstrong? Like, are more big moves to come from St. Louis? Could you see them now going a different route, but looking to add players of this caliber?
Not necessarily, simply because I think that this fit their business plan. This fit the money they had. This fit how much equity they had in draft picks. Doug may go out and do a deal, perhaps, but I don't see it changing his long-term plan on how to rebuild the Blues into a contender. I think that, you know, he believes in young people. We've seen that with Kyrou and Thomas. We've seen what he's done on his blue line. I mean, you know, let's face it, Torrey Krug is only there because his contract allowed him to be there. That trade would have consummated with Philly ages ago. So from that perspective, I think Doug is being very pragmatic on how to build a long-term contender as opposed to have a quick fix, give away lots of draft picks or players and win next year. Doug Armstrong wants to win for 5 or 6 years, not one.
The news from Kevin Weeks is that Yaroslav Askarov, possibly the best goaltending prospect in the world, the 11th overall pick in 2020, has asked for a trade and will not report to the Nashville Predators after they re-sign UC Saros. So what's your sense there? Who's on the hunt for a young goaltender, and will Trotz move quickly here, or is he going to let this one marinate?
Well, we had Barry on the podcast last day of July, I think. And Askarov was one of the conversation pieces. So from that perspective, I think that they have always tried to find something that will not necessarily help Askarov, but will help what the Predators need. And Barry can afford to be patient at this point. You know, he has it's very similar in many ways to what Kevin Cheveldayoff did with PLD and trying to figure out what to do with Dubois and get the best deal. So, if there's a team out there, I think there's a lot of teams out there that could use a good quality young goaltender. He's not helping himself, by the way, if you go rogue and don't report, because you're telling people that you know how much of a teammate are you. There's going to be a lot of, as you guys both know, there's lots of old school mentality in hockey that says, well, if he doesn't report, how controllable is he? Well, what can we do? I can see why he wants to get traded. I think it's probably fair that he gets traded, but certainly that the asset that the Predators need to get back is something important. I look at Montreal, who could use another good young goaltender with Caden Primo. I know they've got Montembeault under contract, but I think Montreal could probably use somebody like that. You always look at the Detroit Red Wings. With what Steve Yzerman is, if they had an issue last year, it wasn't goal scoring, but it was goaltending, particularly the second half of the season. Could Steve Yzerman be a guy where a goaltender of that ilk shows up? And Steve's one of the best at that, and trying to find bodies. But there are enough teams out there that will probably look at and have their scouts say, okay, we like Askarov. What are we prepared to give up? So I think the list is a lot longer than people really realize.
Yeah. Patrick's colleague has written today on the NCAA players coming from European professional. Well, you explain and ask the question to John.
Well, a lawsuit filed against, I guess, the NCAA about professional eligibility to play, and the fact that players coming to the CHL have long been banned from playing the NCAA, but a player like Tom Wielander, who played 2 games in the SHL before joining BU, is allowed to be sort of reclaim his amateur status, I guess. It's a fascinating case. It's going to have it could have big repercussions for how the whole system works. What is your view on all this?
Well, college sports in the United States is quicksand. This is not just hockey. College sports, when you look at name, image, and likeness and what has gone on in all of these sports, the NCAA now, even though they won't admit it, is the 5th big pro sports league on the continent. Mm-hmm. Hockey has always been strange, even within the NCAA. When you consider that a basketball player has to declare for the NBA draft and then can't go back, and yet a hockey player can get drafted in the NHL and still play for seasons in the end. So hockey's been this outlier within the NCAA system. This is one where, if you recall, the NHL held a giant summit after the general managers meetings in February in Florida to go through it and go talk about all the issues within international hockey, within college hockey, junior hockey, minor pro, and the NHL. And I keep getting told after the meeting, I said, well, did they start talking about the CHL eligibility issue? And they said, no, they didn't. But it was always in the back of everyone's mind. It was almost like they didn't want to bring it up.
Right.
They didn't want to talk about it. So that in itself tells you that there's a group of hard-nosed O-line coaches and ADs at these hockey programs, particularly when you look at the established ones. They don't want anything to change. They like status quo, and the smaller schools that try to compete with the BUs and the BCs and the Minnesotas and the Michigans, they don't want anything to change either, because they can't compete at that level, and college hockey would actually get smaller if they in fact started to allow a lot of this competition to and the players to return. So it's a really tough, it's a Pandora's box. I can understand why the lawsuit was lodged. I can understand it. But you better be careful what you wish for in this situation. It may hurt college hockey in the end rather than help.
Yeah, and I mean NCAA athletics has gone through a revolution here in the last few years, from the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit, which totally changed the game on name, image, and likeness, and now.
But Matty, the transfer portal has ruined college sports for me as a fan. It has ruined it as a fan. And now really all it's become is alma mater and donors.
Yep. No, and that's why you've got head coaches at the NCAA. Like the Boston College head football coach resigned to go take a coordinator job in the NFL. UCLA's head football coach resigned to go be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. And both men cited the same thing. Yeah. I'm tired of pimping myself for an 18-year-old who wants more money. Like, I do more time recruiting money out of our alumni base than I do actually recruiting high school athletes that I want to come here and have the program turn successful. So
Jim Harbaugh is the best example. So.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, I'm not sure we've talked since John Forsland was named to the Amazon hockey group, but how are things coming along for Amazon and its hockey outlay in the fall? Because as we know, there's a few Canucks games and some higher pedigree Canucks games, a Hughes Bowl, a Macklin Celebrini game here in Vancouver. Yeah. How are things going on the Amazon hockey side?
I've been on the outside looking in. I've heard a couple of dribs and drabs. I haven't even really heard that the Forsland announcement is official. Sure. But from that perspective, they have the moment they got the contract, they have been working their tail off. Sure. They've had huge meetings with the league. They've had huge meetings with all of their different affiliates. They've tried to involve their Canadian office to a great extent. I think they learned a lot of lessons about who they could hire with, our customs, our immigration issues about hiring Canadians. I think that's been a factor. So, but I fully expect by the time we see, players return getting to camp, we're going to hear that Amazon is full up and running, and they're going to have a really solid group. The one thing I can tell you is that I don't think they're going to have a studio, guys. I think they're going to try to do everything on site at the arena, which will be a great idea to create a lot more ambience and a lot more excitement, kind of like the original Monday Night Football used to do, and kind of like what we did for many, many years on that Saturday show with 4 letters.
Mm-hmm. I know we got you off the golf course, so you enjoy golfing in Niagara Falls and everything you got going on there, Shannon. We'll catch up soon.
By the way, I still like going on onto the horn blower and getting the boat right up to the falls. It's always fun. Oh yeah, I love it.
You're in the duck suit there and all that?
Yeah, I got the poncho going and everything.
Oh, we need a photo. You must share.
I don't know. Hey, listen, I after you sent me that picture of you and Oliver, I'm not sending you anything.
Yeah, I know. So, play golf at Incomeep on Friday. Play with a longtime listener of ours, Randy Houle, whose family has been in Oliver forever. So much so that like Houle's taught John Shannon way back in the day.
No. It was the other way around.
Oh, okay.
It was the Shannons taught the Houles.
The Shannons taught the Houles, my bad. And then playing with the pro there, a longtime listener, Todd Tweedy, who says, oh, yeah, my family grew up in Ottawa or in Oliver as well, and mentioned that the Thompson side of his family knew the Shannon family as well. So I was playing with like 2 benchmark families from Oliver, and they both said, John Shannon is the most famous person come out of Oliver.
Do not go there. Do not go there. We had one player, I think, play in the NHL, but you got to go, Matt. Until
we produce an NHLer from Oliver, John Shannon, and that's how we'll introduce you going forward. The most famous man from Oliver, BC.
Time to stop. We got to go.
See ya.
Take care, John.